Hi, my name is Amelia. Welcome to The Gray Lamb. This is a channel in which I discuss ideas that I'm preparing to make into a book, which is going to be called Scapegoat Lightworker. So I'm an author in Ontario, Canada, who has just extricated herself from a pretty complicated narcissistic family situation. So I'm also using this channel to talk about my story because I think that's an important part of healing. And because there's some things about my story that I think a lot of people can relate to, I'm hoping that this could reach others. But my story is actually very strange. I'm actually the child of two black sheep, and I am an only child. So my story is a little bit different. Everybody's story is different. However, my story, well, we'll get to it now, shall we? So as I said before, I am the child of two black sheep. So I want to just discuss what that means. Basically, when somebody is an only child and they have one narcissistic parent, they have less places to go with their stress and they end up absorbing a lot of it. I had two narcissistic parents, no siblings, and no family to speak of around me. So needless to say, that made my life very difficult to maneuver, very difficult to find out who I was. So here I am in my late 40s, still figuring out who I am. I've spent about the past 20 to 30 years in different forms of therapy. I've learned a lot about helping others. I've learned a lot about helping myself. So I'm here to share whatever it is I can that might help you, and to open up and hope that sharing my story and opening up will help me too. The other videos that I'm going to be making for the channel are directly about abuse in any group. I call it group abuse dynamics, and I'll be making videos about that for ideas I'm developing for my workbook, which will be available in the coming months. So let me tell you a little bit about my family structure. I am the child of two black sheep and only child. I was born in the late 70s in Quebec, Canada. My parents were both musicians, did odd jobs. They didn't have a formal education of any kind. My mother was born in a European country where they did not have toothbrushes or television. So my mother was partially raised by her older siblings. And she came from a very traditional sort of Catholic farmer family, very different than the life that we have, here in Canada in 2026. My mother was, in her words, kept on the farm. They didn't want her to go to high school. They wanted to keep her as the youngest child on for whatever reasons that European families do that. She felt very resentful about this. And she became a musician who left home, I think, at age 20. She wasn't prepared for the world and society enough, and she had, a difficult beginning. My mother married someone who was a good partner and then quickly decided that wasn't for her, went on the road playing music, and met my father. I didn't find out until a few years ago that she had only known my father for 3 months. That could be a lie too. I don't really know. But my mother has spent her life having to sort of cover up shame from abuse that she's gone through in her life, which I can understand. However, this abuse story that went on and on and on served her narcissistic behavior very, very well, and hurt me as well. So my father's story is he lived in a very traditional family in the Ottawa area, in Canada, where he had one sister, he had a father and a mother that had a fairly traditional, normal life. My father complained to me that he was hit with a belt once. He didn't like that. Who would? And he also complained to me that he was abandoned by his parents because There was no high school apparently where he grew up, so he was positioned with an aunt in Ottawa to go to high school. He felt very, very abandoned by this, and I think it's shaped his poor social situations with people in life, and I think he had it really actually rough in high school. Like my mother, my father picked up a guitar and became a musician in his probably late teens, early 20s, not sure when, and he started busking. So busking is playing music outside, open up your instrument case and people throw money in. So my dad became an alcoholic, and he became a drifter by his own words throughout the, I would say, late 60s and 70s until he met my mother. And they did it together. So they played music together. I don't know if it was days, weeks, or months before I was born, but there was a bit of a myth told about my life when I was younger that my parents had some sort of a relationship ceremony, not a wedding. And I had no idea until I was in my 40s that they had only known each other for a very short time before I was born. Therefore, I wasn't planned, and not a surprise that my life was completely made of insecurities. So with my parents being black sheep, meaning they didn't take the normal path, they didn't go to university or college or start a career or start a home and have children in their 20s like they were supposed to, like everybody did. They were discovering their own path. They were creative people. They were traveling around and exploring. Okay, that's fine. So I come along, my mother gets pregnant. My father, during the pregnancy, assaulted my mother, including me as a baby in the womb. Then they found a place to live sometime after I was born where we were settled down for about 3 years. So during that period, my mother was pregnant. She endured an assault from my father. I believe that some bikers saw him assault my mother and beat him up. It's just so insane to think about all this. So when I was born, my mother was in the hospital, and apparently my father did not come to the hospital to see us, because he told me that he was too scared. So when I learned all this during the pandemic, I learned a lot of stuff. I was questioning my mother. I was like, what happened around my birth? Like, I'd always wondered, why am I so screwed up? Why has my life been so bad? Why have I had all these problems in my life? And I was looking at me and I was like, what's wrong with me? So I went through a lot of like what I'm doing now, just looking at my past, looking at history, trying to find a clue. Like, what is wrong with my life? Why was it so difficult and so painful and so hard for me to make my way in life? So looking at my parents' situations, realizing they're both black sheep. Okay, so those were their situations with their families, but how did it affect their perspective, their worldview, their thoughts, and their behavior? What I noticed throughout my childhood was my mother gossiping and looking down on people and being angry without taking any action about my father assaulting her. She was just angry, okay? It's understandable. She would gossip about other people and gossip about relatives, especially being angry at men. And I can understand that. But her being the youngest and the musician and the one who didn't have a traditional family, she didn't have me until she was 30 or 31. She had some self-esteem issues regarding her family. So her perspective started to become negative of society and the world. This and the gossip got into me and under my skin, and it's something that I'm still fighting to this day. So I've had to unlearn these toxic behaviors. On my father's side, it wasn't just gossip. It was more like a general hatred of society, saying that there's no room, you know, for culture in our society. Meanwhile, we live in Canada, which is one of the freest places to live in the world. And just having a very bad attitude about, you know, his family, obviously never having resolved any of his own issues with his family and continuing to carry on. The worst, however, was him making fun of people, like, you know, fat people or whatever. And then me as a child hearing this and starting to do this myself. So I've had to spend great decades of my life trying to unlearn this toxic behavior from my parents' black sheep legacy. So this has made me a black sheep. I am estranged from my parents because of their toxic behavior and patterns. I am a scapegoat, according to my mother. My father doesn't look down on me the same way my mother does. My father's just spent my whole life trying to get validation and access to me, which I don't allow to an abuser. My mother, however, has had two personalities, one being the overgiving, loving mother, which I think is mostly based on an honest desire to help me. But when things go wrong, which is often, her and I are both hypersensitive, we both have health problems, her tendency is to flip on me and pull Darvos and make it look like I'm the one who caused the problem. So that right there is the very definition of being a scapegoat, is having somebody turn against you when there are issues and blame you and humiliate you and disempower you so that my mother could keep her status of being a perfect mother or a good mother. So why did my mother have so many issues being seen as a good mother? Well, my father was abusive, not her fault. We did try to run away from him, but he came to where we were and we weren't really able to get rid of him. He had stopped being abusive to her, but he was definitely emotionally and mentally abusive to me. So my mother was ashamed about that and other things that had happened to her in her life. And she was also ashamed about the fact that I got hit by a car on my 6th birthday. So my mother had been carrying all this shame, not able to work through it with therapists, and it landed on me. So later in my life, when I started to see the cracks in things and question my mother, I was seen as the scapegoat. Smear campaigns were headed in my direction, blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to discuss those two terms with you. I'd love to hear your opinion if you think you are a black sheep or a scapegoat, or if your parents were of this nature, because there's not a lot of people that talk about being the child of two black sheep or even one, or a scapegoat, but their experiences were nothing compared to the abuse that I experienced. However, I was able to reclaim myself. They are still stuck there. I'm going to reclaim myself. Narcissistic people who spend a lot of time trying to control other people, they don't have that peace that we do, that children and adult children of these situations develop. We develop a sense of a higher, more active consciousness. Well, we think that the narcissists are thinking too, but they only have one agenda. Their agenda is to gain something from you in a sense of access to you, validation from you, and protection from you from their own shame. So I'll be talking a lot more about these issues in the videos. Thank you so much for witnessing me and hearing me talk about my story. And if you hear yourself in my story, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.